Here are the materials we'll need for sublimation. We'll need dry ice and regular ice. We'll also need the sublimation apparatus, which is located in the hood. The sublimation apparatus comes equipped with a sand bath and hot plate. The hot plate you'll need to set to an appropriate temperature for your matrix. It also comes with a thermometer, copper tape, and a spatula. Other materials you'll need include a slide and a slide box. Don't forget to desiccate your tissues before sublimating. You'll need a scupula and you'll need the matrix you're trying to apply. The first thing we do is prepare the cold trap by putting dry ice in the dewar flask. This ensures that no matrix is sublimated into the pump. Sometimes putting ethanol in the dewar flask as well is necessary to make sure that the mixture is cold. However, it's easy to overflow, so check to make sure there's none in there beforehand. The next step is to rid the slide of any excess debris. Then we can take an initial mass before sublimation. Be sure to record this initial mass. Personally, I like recording it onto the slide box as well as the pressure, temperature, and time of the sublimation. Then I'll transpose it into my lab notebook later. Next, I'll make sure my sand temperature is appropriate. For Dan, which is what we're sublimating today, it should be about 120 degrees Celsius. Then I'll preemptively dig a hole for the sublimation apparatus to rest into. Now I'm ready to deposit some Dan into the bottom of the sublimation apparatus. Knowing how much to deposit is more of an art than a science, so you'll get a feel for what you need as you experiment more and more. I gently tap the scupula on the side of the bottom of the sublimation apparatus to allow for even dispersion. I'm not putting on the O-ring that you see on the retort stand just yet because it doesn't allow for the scupula to slide easily across the glass. Once I'm done sprinkling the Dan, then I'll grab the O-ring and place it in the ridge that you see on the sublimation apparatus. Next, I'll tape my slide using copper tape to the bottom of the sublimation cold head. You can see that the bottom of the cold head has a metal plate on it. This, in conjunction with the copper tape, allow for a more even temperature distribution across the slide that we desire to sublimate. Ultimately, this leads to a more even matrix application. Next, I turn on the pump so we can achieve vacuum pressure within the apparatus. Now I'm ready to put the cold head of the sublimation apparatus into the bottom. I give the lip of the apparatus a little run around with my fingers to make sure that the O-ring is positioned properly. Next, I'm ready to introduce vacuum into the chamber, but you can't quite see what I'm doing here, so let's zoom in. My first order of business is cutting off the pump from atmospheric pressure. That's what I'm doing here when I turn the green knob clockwise. Then I lift the lever upwards. At this point, I should see a dramatic decrease in pressure from the digital readout. Next, I will make a cold bath in the cold head of the apparatus. I do this by using just regular ice. Filling the cold head halfway with ice should be more than enough. Because of the hoses, sometimes the sublimation apparatus can get a little unstable, so before I walk off to get some water from the tap, I'll stabilize it. You shouldn't need much tap water to make this water bath, maybe 200 mils. At any rate, just make sure it barely covers the ice in the cold head. At this point, we could technically go ahead and sublimate. However, I like to let it sit in the cold head for about 2 minutes. By waiting, you get a better temperature distribution across the slide. I'll preemptively set my timer for 10 minutes. Dan requires 11 with my protocol, but I like a little early notice. Then I'll settle the apparatus into the sand bath, hitting the start button on the timer as soon as it hits the sand. I stabilize the arm in the 2-prong claw on the stand. Then I'll kick up some sand to the bottom of the apparatus. During this 10-minute waiting period, I like to take the temperature of the sand bath, and then I'll also take the readout of the pressure on the pump. For most matrices, you should see a deposit start to form on the bottom of the apparatus. This indicates that the sublimation is occurring. My 10 minutes are up, and I'll set a final minute on the timer. As soon as the timer goes off, carefully remove the apparatus from the sand bath. Place the glassware on a folded up chem wipe. This makes sure that the chem pad underneath does not melt. I'll let this run for about another minute under vacuum just to make sure all of the sublimation has occurred. During this waiting process, make sure that the apparatus is stable. Now we can reintroduce atmospheric pressure. Let's zoom in again so you can see what I'm doing. This will be the opposite of the procedure we followed before. Pull the lever down, turn the knob counterclockwise. It's normal to hear hissing. Now we can detach the cold head from the bottom of the apparatus. Sometimes this takes a little bit of elbow grease. Once the cold head is removed, then becomes the daunting task of taking off your slide. We don't want to tilt the cold head too much here because the water may spill out a little bit and get on your slide. Once the slide is detached, we can temporarily store the cold head back into the bottom of the apparatus, as long as we make sure that the entire apparatus is stable while we're away. Post-sublimation, your slide should go into the desiccator for a while before taking a final mass. Enough time to allow the slide to come back to room temperature should be plenty enough. This ends up being anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes. After desiccating, we're ready to take our final mass. Don't forget to record this value somewhere. For me, it's on the front of the box. It looks like I forgot to record my pressure. Good thing I got it on video. Immediately after sublimation, we need to clean up our workspace. First, I dump out the ice bath from the cold head. Then I remove any remaining copper tape. This should be disposed of in our solid hazardous waste container, which is right behind the sublimation apparatus. Next, I'll take the bottom of the apparatus out of the hood for cleaning. I tend to use a trifecta of solvents to rid the bottom of the apparatus of any leftover Dan. Here I'm using isopropyl alcohol, water, and methanol. Sublimation grade Dan tends to have a lot of impurities. So by using this solvent trio, I make sure that all of the matrix is washed away. I'll also wash the tray where the O-ring sits and the O-ring itself. I dry the bottom of the apparatus with the Kim wipe, and then I give it a good inspection to make sure that my cleaning job was thorough. This Kim wipe potentially might have some Dan still on it, so I'll throw it in our solid hazardous waste, just to be safe. Our next order of business is cleaning the cold head. I'll use the same Kim wipe I've been using to protect the mat from the heat of the apparatus. I'll also use the same 3 solvents and make sure all of the Dan is off of the cold head. The metal plate is slightly raised from the bottom of the cold head, so we need to make sure that we do a thorough job of cleaning around those edges. I've also made it a habit to stick the Kim wipe with solvent up into the top of the cold head. Sometimes excess sublimated matrix can get stuck up in there, and it tends to build up if we don't clean it often. Finally, I'll run the Kim wipe around the rim of the cold head, and I'll even dry out the middle portion just a little bit. This part doesn't have to be super thorough because we only ever put an ice bath in it. I'll replace the protectant Kim wipe for the next user that comes after me. One of my last steps is to use the brush that's hanging on the right side of the hood to clean up any excess sand that I may have spilled. I'll give the space a general organization as well. Lastly, I'll turn the hot plate back down to 70 degrees C, which is where we keep it at all times. Overall, this process usually takes me about an hour to an hour and a half.